Okay, welcome to Monday night. This is our epic Jedi conversation about the book Caste that we're all reading this session, this semester, this part of the year. I'm Letty Garza of Epic Consulting, providing this space to have these conversations and learn a little bit more about ourselves and how to be anti-racist and learn historically how things are affecting us and then how that's impacting the decisions that are being made today and how we treat each other, workforce, and in the communities. Today we're going to be talking about chapters 12, 13, and 14 under the topic of scapegoats and underdogs. And I think we probably all have some idea of what those words mean and have applied them in some way. As soon as we learned what the words meant, we understand what they mean in terms of sports, in terms of conflict, historically probably. And then in society, we're going to dive a little bit more into what that means in terms of caste. And today we have a couple of people joining us. Richard McCrow, who's always been here hanging out, talking about these things, difficult and not so difficult. Welcome, Richard.
Good evening, everybody.
And then also welcome Dr. Tommy Tunson. How are you, sir?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Hi, Tommy.
Hey, Rich.
We will probably see London McBride later to join us for this conversation. And just like with all the other weeks, especially with this book, there's a lot to cover. So I wanted to start by getting sort of a feel of our definitions for scapegoats and underdogs. These could be out of the book. Maybe you've actually looked the words up, or what your experiences have been with these words and your understanding of what they mean. And then we can talk about what they mean in relation to this book. So as I understand it, and mostly scapegoats for me, I don't think I've used the phrase or heard it as much as underdog. And I feel like in my experience, just personally, my experience with the word underdog has really related to sports, movies, actually playing sports, people talking about sports. It's all I ever really associated with the word underdog, but also in film, underdog in other ways, you know, in society and overcoming obstacles. I don't know that I have a whole lot of memories when it comes to scapegoat, and I don't know that I have a whole lot of memories outside of what I described for underdog. So it was really interesting for me to read these chapters to think about the origins and then how to apply it to how we treat people or how people are seen in the caste system today. So do either of you want to share? Well, that's why you're here, right? You're gonna share what either of those words or both of those words. Welcome. Welcome. This is the way it works. Either of those words or both of those words and what you thought before you read Caste. Richard?
Oh, yeah. I think the majority of the time for scapegoat, I think the majority of the time that I've heard that term has been in the military. When something screws up and then, you know, somebody goes after, there's discussion among the troops or the sailors of if somebody just is fired or accused or goes to office hours or captain's mess, and people recognize they were used as a scapegoat, and that conversation will take place, especially if leadership wasn't doing their job. Then leadership goes after the youngest, most inexperienced sailor that was involved in the incident, and people will discuss a scapegoat. And then as far as underdog, you're right in terms of sports and those kinds of things. But I have heard the discussion when somebody, you know, comes into an organization and is fighting hard to achieve things and has some successes, even though being seen as an underdog.
Tommy?
I have the same example that Rich did about the military, but it's more recent. Afghanistan, the Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel was the scapegoat for what happened because he made a comment that probably I wouldn't have made, but he did make the comment, and everything was pinned on him as far as undermining the military, and he was made the scapegoat for what happened with that. And I've also seen the scapegoat in law enforcement where um, if a shooting occurs in a city and it becomes very political, very highly contested, the scapegoat for that is usually going to be the police department. And it's going to be the administration in the police department that they go after and say, you should have done this and you should have done that to prevent this from happening. So it's pretty much the same as like the example that was given about the military. Underdog, I've had different examples from the military, people that they never thought would get promoted, in fact, got promoted. Somebody who was the least likely to get promoted. Somebody in policing who was least likely to achieve rank, achieve a certain type of task force operation because it was a big deal in policing to get that. And the least expected person to achieve success would be the underdog. And a lot of times you got that. And of course, in sports, which tonight um, we're here with you, Letty, because this is such a great place to be. Although our Seattle Seahawks are playing football at this very moment, but this is a much better place to be in.
Oh, they are.
Richard's got, shut up. There's a flag in the back if you want to kind of see. I was going to hang something in here and then I forgot. Richard's got his little flag going on back there in the background.
They're
I don't know if you guys can
Saints.
see. Well, with that, I'm going to bring on London is joining us. So let me bring him on so everyone can start talking trash about football teams. Hi, London. Wait, you're muted. Hang on.
Hey, what's going on?
London, I got a bone to pick with you. What did he let him make that interception for at the very last minute? We could have won that game.
Hey,
I told you to reserve the football talk for after this meeting.
I don't know. I'm gonna tell you this, but he's a good kid. I think he was that when you think about how much pressure he was under at that moment in time.
He was a scapegoat. He was the scapegoat for that game.
For that game,
he ended up being the underdog.
But he came in and did his thing. I think him going forward. I think the kid will be he's gonna be good. He's gonna fit right in. And I already said, I know we're going on this football tangent, but I always said you gotta give UCLA and Chip Kelly time. I was on the team that had a coaching change mid-season, and you gotta roll with it, and they doing fine. I mean, I really think that this is their last loss. I think they're gonna run the tables for the rest of it.
They better, or I'll be broke.
Yeah, they'll be good.
Oh my goodness.
Go Bruins. Let's get them.
Well, the football chat is okay because we're talking about where we've experienced, have heard of, have defined underdogs and scapegoats in our lives. And we're saying, I was saying for me personally, it doesn't seem like it's come up except maybe reading about it and seeing it on film. And then for underdogs, I feel like a lot of the exposure we have to that word is about sports. It's usually like sports or some other kind of obstacles being overcome in like a movie or something. So everyone was kind of talking about what those words meant to them. So if you want to share a little bit for both of those words, if you want maybe experiences that you've heard the word, how it's been defined, or how you would use it or have used it outside of Caste.
In regards to scapegoat and underdogs?
Yeah, those two words, yeah.
Yeah. Scapegoat, you hear it, definitely within our profession too. Somebody that's basically, kind of left out to dry for the issues or the reasoning or reasons that some things might go bad or things like that. You try to put the blame on them, kind of just the scapegoat. Everything falls onto them. And that's where I've seen it, where I've, in sports, I've experienced it. But yeah, underdog, same way. Underdog is more to me in sports that I've seen it. Like you always cheering and rooting for the underdog to pull through and to get the victory. But also in our profession, I mean, you see people put in a lot of work in doing what they do, and they don't get a lot of the credit. So you really start rooting for the one that's kind of been passed over for so many times. Think about a young officer or an officer that that has the capabilities or the qualities of a good leader, but because they don't conform to the status quo or to the culture, they get passed over. They end up becoming the underdog, and you're always cheering for them to finally get their chance to be put in those leadership positions so that things will actually change.
Mm-hmm. Those are good examples. Okay, so I feel like maybe the consensus is that in terms of scapegoat, maybe we've heard the phrase, we know what it means, we understand the concept, but not as, I don't know if accessible is the right word, but hasn't been used in terms of our paths in a lot of ways. You gave examples of military and in law enforcement. So now we're going to jump into the example that she started with in the books in the first chapter. So this is chapter 12, and the title of that chapter is "A Scapegoat to Bear the Sins of the World." Right? So I think the understanding probably for a lot of people is the idea that the scapegoat kind of takes on that, whatever the blame is, that's the sins, right? That they're taking that on. But that's not the original, or at least the intent of the word in the beginning, especially at the beginning of this chapter where she talks about an actual goat being used, right, and sacrificed. And where that goes from bearing misfortune, because the goat would, be sort of anointed with all the sins of the group of the Israelites and then sent out to kind of bear whatever came, right? Death probably, whatever misfortune came to it, and that sort of alleviated the sins of the group. So this idea, this shift, and she shares that story sort of to shift us from bearing the misfortune to bringing misfortune. And I don't know that in the examples, especially that we all shared, that's something that kind of fits that definition. I feel like it's still like, oh no, we're going to sacrifice this person to bear the brunt of whatever it is that we're being blamed for, instead of bringing misfortune. But the way she lays out caste, the lowest caste is bringing misfortune to whatever situation they're in. Does that like ring true for you, or did you read it a different way? Anybody? Do I make sense?
So
it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm getting, because I understand the scapegoat, kind of the scapegoat reference, especially like with the lower caste. And the thing that I could think of is how Hitler used the Jews as their scapegoat for he blamed the loss of the First World War on the Jews, and that's when he ends up writing writing Mein Kampf and all that kind of stuff, and then going fast forward to him when he takes over Germany, and then still going after them and basically indoctrinating everybody that the Jews are to blame for the Germans' misfortune. And so that's that's when I think about that, that's exactly what I picture is exactly what Hitler did by using them as their scapegoat. And then because of the situation, because they have become the lower rung of the caste system in Germany, everything that happens to them is because of who they are, and that starts to play a psychological game on the Jews, because now they believe that all of the bad stuff that's happening to us is because we're Jews, but they don't look at it as because of the evil that's going on in this man's heart and what they're doing to them. They start to have that internal struggle, and their own self-worth ends up diminishing because of all of the pain that they've been accustomed to now at the hands of the Nazi Party.
Mm-hmm. That's a good example of this idea of that they're bringing them in. So wherever they are, that's where the misfortune is going to be. It's like following them. They're part of it. If they wasn't for them, that misfortune would not exist. Instead of being like a vessel that carries whatever the sacrifices whatever the sins are that they're trying to cleanse, instead of it being that way where there's like a collective agreement, this is what we're doing, and that thing or that person would be in our case, that thing is going to carry our sins away. Where it's shifted is that no, all of those people that look like that are actually bringing the misfortune, so we have to control that. We have to control them as much as possible. Anyone else want to comment on this?
I can use a more modern example. Absolutely same parallel with London, but I'm going to use a more modern example. It's going to hit close to home and be uncomfortable. In the 80s and the 90s, the war on drugs. And in the war on drugs, the scapegoat was African Americans, because they were the ones doing all the drugs. So when they declared the war on drugs, all the community-oriented policing programs, all of those billions of dollars went to fight the war on drugs. And the victims of that, the scapegoats of that, for society's ill at the time, crime was committed by Black folk. Drugs were ingested by Black folk, and gangs were started by Black folks. So that's where all the funding and the money went toward that scapegoats for that at that time. It's a very real. I lived it. I watched it. I saw it. I was a young cop, so I didn't understand. But then some of the rhetoric I would hear backstage told me that that's what the scapegoat was.
Mm-hmm. The example that comes up. Well, before I do that, Richard, did you want to add anything?
No, I like hearing both the conversations because I'm just thinking of Tommy's modern example and the constant things that you hear to say, all of our crime, all of our is due to African Americans. We've got black on black crime. We've got just every excuse to throw to make sure the blame is not on white people. And so I sit there and listen, and I'm like, yes, and I appreciate the insight.
So that 80s and 90s example is a good one for leading into this next point that she makes in this chapter, when she gives the example of Charles Stewart in 1989, orchestrating the murder of his wife, right? Orchestrating the murder of his wife for insurance money. And I'll just say, based on all of my listening of true crime podcasts and documentaries, that it's usually the husband. And they don't really point the finger that way in the 80s and 90s, right? So what he was able to do, based on what you're talking about, Tommy, what society was going through at the time, he was able to stage the murder and then say that a black man with a raspy voice was robbing us and shot us both. he was able to say that, and because he was able to say that, or he was able to say that because he knew people would believe him, and then the search for the killer turns away from him, right? So this idea that the caste system was his unwitting accomplice and the scapegoat caste singularly capable of any depravity. That's a typo. So it's kind of like what you were saying about it's only Black people that are doing all the drugs and the crime, right? So if we know that in the 80s and 90s, when a white man says a Black man just came and shot my wife and killed her, there's no question that that's true. Like we don't even question it. We're just
look what just happened. He's running into park, and say it doesn't matter what era. The lady in Texas who said that her kids were drowned by a Black person, and it ends up not being the case.
Sorry, I had to take a deep breath. So I like the way that Wilkerson kind of pulls this to get the scapegoat seen as you can blame them for societal ills, and then it is that way because they bring misfortune. So if there's crime, of course it's going to be the lower caste. And then in 1989, in this particular case, being able to use the system in such a way that, of course, the lowest caste is going to be blamed. And how easy it was to do that for as long as they could, because criminals sometimes are stupid. And oh my God, that was such an awful case.
Yeah, I can't help but think of COVID-19 as a recent example. COVID-19 and the terms like China virus. The China virus is coming to get us. And the truth of the matter is the infection in the U.S. mostly came from Europe. And in sort of the back door, as our president was claiming the China virus and blaming China, which China's role in all this may be there, but the actual infection rate in the U.S. Is due to the influx of Europeans that had the virus, not the other way around. And so you lose focus because he was focused in on the Chinese and their role, but really made it about the race rather than what was actually happening in the world. And the same thing is talked about with Ebola and the
yes. Yeah, I'll pull that up. A comment on that. That when it first started, we can talk about what happened after this, but when it first started, the Western world looked on mostly with pity and detachment because it was a problem in Africa. And so no resources, no, media attention. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm saying things on repeat, but it's the truth. We're just hitting it from different angles. So how detached we are until it comes to our front door, right? And then you can spend millions of dollars on it, and then you can call more attention to it. And oh no, the white people are getting infected, so now we have to do something. That happened with Ebola, which she mentions in the book should have been, that warning for what happened last year. But I like the storytelling of Texas and the bombings that were happening in Texas. I kind of remember this when it was happening, and remember not hearing about it really until, what was it, like 3 or 4 bombings in? Because the police department or whoever was investigating just kept looking at it like singular events. So what happens when we victim blame, and who are we victim blaming? You know the answer. This is caste again. This is the system, just like with Charles Stewart. This is the system helping to create more victims or more victimization of people, to create a bigger gap in the help and investigation. The system did this, right? It allows people to be dismissive. Okay, I guess I'm just teaching today.
Well, what I was thinking of is the police chief's response later in the investigation, when then he's suddenly apologizing for the way he acted early on in the investigation, and even preaching to the media that, we sort of suspect he might have just blown himself up. The first,
God.
and it's like, just that thought process. And I was absolutely I was purposely waiting because I want to hear what the two law enforcement guys had to say about that.
They don't want to
say. You notice we were silent.
They don't want to say. They're like, yeah, I did that yesterday. I dealt with that crap yesterday. But it's because we're talking about caste here. So it's because of this. It's this idea that scapegoats are expendable. We're only going to put so much effort in until it affects someone that looks more like me, maybe in the case of the Texas law enforcement. And I know that, like I said, we keep having these conversations around the same topics. It's the same feelings, and we have to keep bringing it up because it's the truth.
Yeah.
Because it really is happening this way, and it really is impacted by the way the system is built, specifically like this.
Yeah.
Well, there's another example. I don't know if it's true in the Navy. I know it's true in the Army. And London, you're going to say the same thing when it comes to law enforcement chief executives. All the military bases that I ever traveled to over the years, when I would go in the hall, up in the wall would be who all the commanding generals were on one side and who all the sergeant majors were on the other side. All the sergeant majors were Black or Hispanic. All the commanding generals were white. So if you want to talk about a caste system, that system has perpetuated itself since the Civil War. And we're better in the military. I think we're better in law enforcement, but I think you understand what I'm saying, because that is definitely a caste system in the military and in law enforcement.
Yep. Yeah, we still hold on to those same systems, and they all are born from people feeling that a set group has the ability to lead better, to do things better, and it's so funny. They are typically not even the majority, but it's kind of like I think I was watching a clip from A Bug's Life, when it was talking about the ants, right, and how the ants are numerous, but as long as we keep them believing that they actually have no power, then we'll basically keep destroying them or holding them at bay. But knowing that the majority of the people in society pretty much are outnumber those that are in those positions of authority, or in a sense at the top of the caste system. But they play that's my dog. But they play that psychological game on they play that psychological game on people to hold those on the lower caste rung at bay. And so I think that's just been the story that's been going on over and over and over again. And unless we basically just like the Wizard of Oz, we go back and be like, man, you ain't all that tough anyway, Oz. Unless we do that and have the guts to do that, and then end up changing our way of thinking, that we're going to keep this thing going.
Yeah. Some recent scapegoating that I've witnessed has to do with the lack of diversity, and blaming the lack of diversity on people of color not getting on committees, and people of color aren't doing that. They're not playing their role. These people of color aren't joining in, and you just sit there. You got to be shitting me. You don't. And so the more I understand, and when I was that's what I liked about reading, because it was a difficult read, because I was having trouble tying both of them together, scapegoats or underdogs, into the topic at hand. But then as we're talking now, more and more it's sinking in, and I understand. And even though we sometimes think on a grander scale, like football and those kinds of things, but I think when you start even looking at the micro aggressions and the way folks blame people of color for not being more diverse, not getting involved, and it's that happens, and that's happened recently.
Yeah. Well, you even hear
what they do with that too, London, and this, is they'll all of a sudden say, well, I need a quantifier. You need to define to me, what do you mean by black? What really is black? What really
white
is
people,
Hispanic?
why don't you tell us, white people, because you created the
yeah. What do
Yeah.
you mean by racial diversity? What exactly does that mean? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
This is what we talked about. Richard and I had a conversation very similar to what I just said about, yes, there needs to be diversity, and then people are complaining about it and throwing up their hands, and why do we need this, and why are you making such a big deal out of it? And then, that's what we want to know, right? Why are you making such a big deal out of race? If you didn't think it was a big deal, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So why don't you figure it out?
You're right, Betsy. You're totally right.
Yep.
And it's a perfect scapegoat. It's a perfect storm for scapegoating, because what people are doing now in that caste system is they're flipping the script. So before we would say neo-Nazi for white supremacists. Now they are saying you're neo-racist. But if you look at the definition of neo-racist, we can't be. But those words are trying to, again, be a scapegoat, because we're, quote unquote, the underdog in the caste system.
Yeah. And when you when you feel power slipping away, and we've seen that, throughout history, when you feel the power slipping away, you definitely do even more drastic things to try to retain that power. And so that's what we're seeing. And it is true. Scapegoating and trying to flip the script on all of these things is what we see them doing. Like even in policing, how we can talk about the shootings that were, totally excessive force. And the things that I hear from some officers is that, well, they shouldn't have resisted.
They should have complied.
And I'm like, okay, no, stop it. And that's the thing. It's like, well, here's a question. Why do you think they didn't comply? Like, could it be a historical reason why? Could it be some kind of trauma that they're dealing with? Like, nobody wants to look into that. They just expect people to comply. And it's like, no, unless you know the whole story, they're scared, and rightfully so. So it's just, yeah. Sorry.
But all of this whole idea, though, especially about fear, really does lead into this next chapter, because I think this is another one of those things that I was like, I didn't quite understand when you say these terms, right? So the insecure alpha and the purpose of an underdog. Okay, so the alpha idea, she makes it very clear that there's a distinction, because apparently we use alpha male as if that's the only kind of alpha that exists. And we attribute certain characteristics to an alpha male. So someone is male is behaving in a certain way, and like demanding, and there's going to be a difference here in the terms that we use, demanding action, or demanding respect, or demanding work from whatever the team is, whatever the team looks like. That's the only version of an alpha that exists, and somehow we're comparing that to, like wolf packs, when people who really understand how wolf packs work know and understand that that's not actually how the alpha works. But I'd like to hear from these three males, what when you think of the word alpha, like what does that, I'm sure you guys have run across them. None of you seem like you're this kind of characteristics are not part of your game, but I don't know, maybe you feel like you've had to take that on at one point or another in your careers. Anybody want to talk about alpha males? No.
I'll go, because I hear it. I hear it in our briefings a lot when I was back in patrol. When things happen, and all you hear is that we're alphas. We're gonna get stuff done. We're this, we're that, and to me, the definition of what I seen and when people were using this term was that you're not going to tell us what to do. This is how we've always done stuff. There's no reason to try to get us to change. So in my eyes, that looked like, okay, well, if we tell you to go out here and, kiss babies and shake hands, you're saying, nope, I'm an alpha. I don't do that stuff. I just, I bite people, whatever. It's like that's exactly the image that I got from a lot of people that didn't want to go against the norm. And it is true. They took on this thing like truly like this wolf pack, and like, no, this is what the alpha male does. The alpha male makes all the decisions, goes straight ahead, like doesn't get sidetracked. Like this is it. And I was like, I don't really think you're using that the way you think it's supposed to be.
What you think it means.
Yeah, there it is. A Princess Bride. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I get from the military standpoint. There was I spent 30 years in, so maybe the first 15 years. That term as alpha male, the head of the pack, that kind of thing, but in that authoritarian dictator, realm was probably the norm for the military. And then a lot of things happened, and a lot of changes came about. And towards the end of my career, the good leaders, and we talked about this all the time, is the folks that would have a CV as long as your arm, but couldn't lead their way out of a paper bag. But there was always those one individual leaders that were quiet in demeanor, but knew that people just respected them automatically, but could get people to perform at levels that even they didn't expect that they could do. And so that's the alpha male that I would like to lean towards and aspire to be before I'm 90, kind of thing. But it is that where people have respect, and there is kindness and empathy and involved in that. And so that's why it took me a second to say, why are we talking about packs of dogs? But understanding kindness and how you treat animals, and just the example she said, and knowing if you have to scold and hit, then you've lost the battle, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then it was like, okay, I'm understanding a little bit how this analogy is working. And so it makes you really evaluate how you treat people across the spectrum. And so, yeah, I like to lean towards the newfound alpha than the old school, dictator, I'm in charge kind of alpha. Not that things have changed. I'm just saying that's where I would like to be.
I'm going to use a law enforcement example and an academic example at the same time to talk about alphas and alpha males. And Rich and Lyndon both will know what I'm talking about. So I walk into a training room at a metropolitan police department. So there's a diverse group of people in the audience. I stand in front. I look out over the 50 people in the audience, and right away, I can tell who the alphas are in the room. Okay, you can tell who the traffic guys are, the community relations people, the city staff that is sitting in the room. You can tell the administrators, the executive administrators who are sitting in the room, because they'll sit always in the back on the right-hand side near an exit. Those that don't know where to fit in are scattered throughout this training session. The SWAT team is always together up front because in law enforcement, they consider themselves the ultimate alphas. The same in the military. When I go into a military room to train, same thing. Those that are in the Med Corps, that a corpsman will sit in one place. Those that are infantry will sit in one place. Those that are combat support will sit in one place. And the Rangers and Special Forces will sit in one place. That's how you can pick out. And London and Rich both know what I'm talking about. You walk in a room, you know where the alphas are sitting and how they're hanging out.
Why is it that you think that I wouldn't know?
Okay. Do you know when you walk in a room of law enforcement?
I know a big fat jerk when I see one.
Do you know that what that jerk is an alpha?
Yes, I'm a woman. Please. We don't need to go down that road. But yes.
I could be wrong, but at the beginning of this, you said you three males should be able to tell me. And then you just
No, I wanted to hear your perspective. I wanted to hear your experiences and how they apply to that particular term, because even Richard, when you were saying like the old school using alpha male as like an old school thing. Well, the truth is that the actual meaning is not what everyone started using it as, because someone misinterpreted what that meant to be the leader of the pack.
Yeah.
And so like that description, this true alpha, the commanding authority through their calm oversight of those who depend on them. I think that's a huge, so two things. One is demanding authority and one is commanding authority, right? So if you walk into a room and not have to say anything and you just know that that person commands authority, that people will look to them for advice, they respect them without them having to, react or overreact or say or be loud or whatever. Yeah. But then this idea that they're always also thinking about the people that are depending on them to be that leader. And in all of the descriptions that probably most people will give when they hear the term alpha male has to do a lot with like the self, right? The ego, self-actualization, self-image. And I don't think that anyone is saying that that's not necessarily a good thing. And it will probably be necessary in some cases. But when we're saying it because we're comparing it to the way a wolf pack runs, then we are incorrect, because that's not the way that it works in the animal kingdom. I mean, even Disney movies understand the setup, and they share with kids, like, if you're going to be this big fat jerk and try to lead the pack, someone's going to take you down. Like, it happens over and over. That message is loud and clear in those movies.
I think Tommy's correct. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think
no,
Tommy's
you
correct.
go.
The second I start talking, I'm like, oh, she's not finished. I panic. I think Tommy's correct in the traditional thought process of what we think alpha is. You can walk into a room, and Letty's correct also. I can spot an asshole. And that's the traditional sense of what we think an alpha is. But I think of alphas now, after reading what Wilkerson had to say, in sort of a different light. I use the example of the Iraq War when we first invaded Iraq, and I remember, and I can't remember the specifics of why they were surrounded by civilian population, but it was Green Berets that were surrounded, or it was a mix of special forces that were totally surrounded by civilians that had, rocks and sticks and things like that, and the military had weapons. And then I remember the one, and I can't remember his rank, but he stepped in front and then looked at his men and said, put your weapons down, pull them down, lay them down. And they actually set their weapons down, and it calmed that whole group of civilians that were ready to attack and defend their homes, thinking that the U.S. military was about to start shooting and killing, but then it calmed the whole situation down. And so I don't even know who that soldier is at the time that happened, but that to me is an alpha that's starting to, the awareness is there and the empathy is there, and thinking through, like, these folks are defending their homes, not that they are out to kill American soldiers, and so we've got to send a different message. And so, yeah, it is definitely a different definition and a different insight into what an alpha truly is.
And on the flip side of that, this was the most interesting to me out of all of the 3 chapters that we read, was this Omega's idea and how she defines it and explains it, that even though they like have to kind of exist and we're talking about animals here, but they have to exist in the pack because of the way that the hierarchy is working for their survival, because that's what they're thinking, right, is survival. And this can translate to our caste system as human beings, but only to the extent that there's punishment. I don't think that in terms of caste, that the bottom rung, if they're seen as omegas, is given credit for being the social glue or for helping with the survival of the pack, right? With the survival of a society. It's given deference in the animal kingdom, but it's not so much as humans. And then this, and we can talk a little bit about this if you can relate anything to this particular idea. The loss of the omega can threaten social cohesion and put the entire pack at risk. So even at the what we would consider the lowest part of the hierarchy in a wolf pack, losing that bottom rung, so to speak, actually threatens the way that the pack survives or not. And then the idea that they're not necessarily replaced, because even as animals, they understand that you don't have to demote somebody to fill that space. You all just kind of have to come together and figure out how to survive without that particular animal in that hierarchy.
Seems like the omega becomes the moral compass for the wolf pack. Like, and then you think about it, yeah.
Would it be the weakness? Like,
yeah.
Like I think earlier, I have it somewhere here, blaming the societal ills on groups with the least power and the least to say, or the least say, not the least to say, the least say. So there's no blame involved, right, with the animal pack. There's no blame. It's just how it is. It's just how it is, and we can't survive without it.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, when you really think about society, you can't survive. It would be like literally the purge if we didn't have those that would stand up and become the fixture, the moral compass of society. No matter where they fall in line on in the caste system, if good men allowed evil to continue, in that sense, like if we didn't stand up for that stuff. But once and I think that's why it's so important is when folks that know the truth stop fighting for the truth, then evil can go ahead unchecked. And that's what you saw. That's what you saw in Nazi Germany. I mean, shoot, Hitler almost took over the dang world. And a lot, even the U.S. didn't check him on those things. And then you see even in with colonization, how no one checked folks coming to the New World to say you can't just slaughter people and enslave an entire continent. You can't do that. Like, it's just. But no one said anything, and I think it's a lot to do with fear, and it's a lot to do with egos, and when it comes down to it, because of that caste system, because we set up that caste system in a way where the fear of those, whether in the middle rung or the lower rung, the fear of rising up, like we said before, because of that psychological impact that the upper caste system has placed on everybody, kind of going into even law enforcement. When you see what happened with the caste system that you have in law enforcement, you see what happened with George Floyd. No one was going to stop Chauvin, especially out there, because they were rookies. They didn't have that much time on. So you see, no one is going to interfere, especially when you feel like, your career is at stake, or in the sense of a bigger picture, your life is at stake. Like, I'm not going to interfere. So.
Yeah. And that, the whole New World thing, that was ordained by God, right? Like, God gave us permission is what the rule was at that point.
The rule was,
so there was always a reason. There was always a reason why you could, and why people probably didn't stop each other.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Because God said we could. How do we know? Because I said that God said I could. That's
for real. Yeah.
That's how I'm interpreting it. Okay. The last thing out of this chapter that I wanted to point out about the Omega was, or just like the roles, these roles that are assigned, is this idea. I mean, I think we know this to be true, because we know that when she makes the reference, she's talking about human beings, but the roles are not artificially assigned based on what an individual wolf looks like. And that's why in the hierarchy of the pack, the alpha doesn't pick someone else to take that bottom role, that Omega role. They don't just say, okay, you're now the last. You're now the weakest link, so you have to walk over here, and you have to eat last. And maybe it works itself out in the wild in that way, but it's not like they say, oh well, your tail's not as bushy as mine, so you have to now be the Omega. We do that. Human beings do that. This is how we know our roles are already assigned. Okay. This is heavy stuff. It's awful. Okay.
Yeah.
Chapter 14 kind of takes all of these ideas and puts them into perspective of everyday life. There are several examples that she talks about that are just like, it could happen to anybody any given day of any week. The intrusion of caste in everyday life. The first example was that in Oakland, that father that was having breakfast with his son, just like normal breakfast, maybe like at Denny's or something, and having a conversation about their personal life and what they were going through and how he was trying to raise his kid. Do you guys remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to share what happened? I want someone else to tell this story. With that lady who had the audacity. Who else wants to share the audacity of the diner? None of you? Because I want to talk about this. People in the upper caste controlling the rightful role of lower caste parents and their children.
Well, yeah, I just thinking about that story. Yeah, she basically, because where she was situated in the caste system, being on that upper rung, she had the audacity to tell this child basically to disobey his father, and that's what I got out of that was how do you like my mama say, how do you fix your lips to say some stuff like that to and it's true, but this is a perfect example, like recent example, when all of a lot of the social unrest was going on, the protests due to George Floyd and you name it, all the stuff going on. In our city, we had there was like a speaker series that was going on, and my wife was actually invited to talk, and people questioned her. And I have another friend who also was invited to speak somewhere, but white people questioned her blackness first on how could she talk about black issues, because she's black. So how could you talk about those issues? And these whites in our city had the nerve to basically say, what do you know about this stuff? But then when she gets up and she starts talking, now they expect that her validation is now coming from them. Oh, you did so well. Oh, you did so great. And it's like, how do you put yourself in that position to first say if I'm qualified based on your whiteness, not me being who I am, and then now now you're telling me to get my my accolades from you. Like, I think that totally messed me up. So yeah, I that's when I read that story, that's exactly what I thought. I was like, the audacity,
Yeah, but it's like the father's invisible. Just like your wife's experiences they didn't mean anything until the white people decided that it was relevant to the time.
Of course.
And that father was invisible as she walks over and starts talking to the kid. And it's like, how do you know that that's, I mean, thinking about the behavior of like the slave owners and whoever was running the plantations, that's how they acted, right? Because there was no families. They were all just chattel. So it's like, well, who taught you? Like, it's 2000 whatever. How do you know that's it's like, I don't know. Is there a class that they take? I don't know.
It is. It's called home training.
I was going to say, it comes from the generations in that house.
Yeah.
The entitlement.
Yep. Yeah.
It's just so
All-
crazy to
all
me
day
because
long.
it's not like nobody says, well, maybe they do say, but I feel like in the family setting, nobody says ignore the parents and talk to the kids, right? Like something else is driving that, like the caste, being born into it, seeing it all your life. But it's not like anybody, I don't know, maybe they did. Maybe that lady watched some training videos. I don't know.
You know, it reminds me of what my dad taught. What my dad taught me and what he told me about his childhood, especially in Waco, Texas, especially when they shut down his school and shut down his school during integration and didn't basically forced him to go to white schools and didn't utilize any of the black teachers from his school. So it was almost like the same thing. It's like, we're going to tell you what we want you to know, because what you've been given is not good enough. So, you know, forget all the stuff that you learned. We're going to teach you this. This is the real way. And that's how I felt, you know, with that lady, is just dismissing his father. It's like, well, you don't know anything. You're black. You don't know anything. Let me teach you. Let me show you what you should be doing. You know, and it's just, but that's because that's how the system was created. And like you said, Letty, you can go all the way back, go to religion and see where they forged that in stone. It's like, thus saith the Lord. Like, and they're like, we gonna run with it. We gonna run with it. And that's exactly what they did. And remember, they don't want to disappoint God. They don't want to disappoint their gods in other religions as well. They want to do exactly what their deity tells them to do. And if it's everybody's down here, these people are down here because of this curse, because of these issues, then so be it. And folks will run with it instead of actually learning and really studying the truth.
Your school example. Oh wait, go ahead, Richard, because I'm going to move on to another point right now.
Oh, I just you know, the policing of roles but you know, in the conversations that must take place in white family homes to allow that to happen. I just sit there and just wonder what is actually being said. Is it you know, black people don't understand how to raise children, and we see it all the time, and that's why black people end up in jail. And that's the conversation that I'm having with my child as my child is growing up. So the child walks into the restaurant as an adult, still mentally in their adolescence, in their thought processes, and then interjects you know, her will upon that family and those kids. And it boggles my mind that those conversations, you know, I mean, I had some weird conversations in my life, but never the intrusive lifestyle that you have mentally, that you just think that it's okay to interrupt a family.
God said.
Yep.
So the school example, this idea that, you know, because if you're in the dominant caste, you get to throw your weight around because you know better and you get to decide. And it's just because that's just the way that it's been, because those opportunities haven't been afforded to people of color, generally speaking. Obviously, we're not going to have an argument about how many people, and I can count them on one hand, how many people have been in these roles that make policy or make decisions about these things. Because we know, okay, it's 2021, and we know that those things have changed. But then when you see like the scenes that she talks about, the scenes of caste in action, the different settings and the different things that people have gone through, I mean, those are things that they're happening right now. They're happening right now, different parts of the country. Some lady is interrupting some dad with his kid, you know, because she feels like she has the right to step in because she's in the dominant caste and knows better. these aren't things of the past. The entitlement is real.
We call that privilege in today's caste language. The dominant caste has the privilege to assert its power over the lower caste member. And that's just the way it has gone forever. It's just that now we're putting different names on it.
Mm-hmm. I want your take on this next comment because, okay, I'm not gonna preface it. I want to get your opinion. Every day across America, wherever two or more are gathered, caste can infect the most ordinary of interchanges.
London, you know what they say about more than two of us together, right, London?
We a gang.
So it's great. I said I wanted to say, so you have to share.
How could you lead us out like that one when we've heard that one since we were however little?
These are not my words.
Together.
They're not my words. Wilkerson said this about white people.
No. Rich doesn't remember, but we were in a group at the college, me and some others, and they said, watch out, there's two or more of us together. You know what they're going to call it if two or more of us are seen together. Rich, you don't remember that, but it was said out in the quad area.
Man.
You're a gang.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because it got
to call the gang unit.
You got to call them. But it gets it. I mean, you think about it, and it's crazy because that's exactly what was going on during Jim Crow. It's like, whoop, they got two or three of them hanging on the corner. They up to no good. Get them. And then it and so it basically, you know, all of that stuff just got trickled down and redefined and, you know, made into laws and, you know, even more laws. And so, I mean, you're dealing with the same system, just, you know, in a sense, worded differently, and kind of explained in a way where people be like, oh, well, that's not bad. They're just, we're trying to save the community, and like it's crazy. You know, I'm in this course at the Museum of Tolerance this week, and we were looking at this painting of Hitler before he came to power, and he's at this bar because, you know, that's where he kind of started spewing all of his craziness too. He's at this bar talking to all these people, and he has this captive audience, and you can see the faces, even though, I mean, the painting like said 1,000 words basically. I mean, you just look at it and you say, I know what these people are thinking. And it's the same way now. It's just like, you know, because of the rhetoric that's out there, because of what's being said and what has been said in the past, we start to say, oh, well, you know what? Everybody was right. Whatever they said about those people is so true. It's so true. And I've heard it within my own colleagues. It's like, yep, parenting. The reason why your kids in your neighborhood are that bad is because of lack of parenting. And I'm like, okay, no, that's not it. But they don't want to have those conversations. They would rather be spoon-fed their opinions than to step out of their comfort zones and be freed from their ignorance. So, you know, that's just sad.
Thank you, Tommy, for reacting the way that you did, because yes, definitely the whole idea of two or more people gathered together. But the reason I like this is because she is now saying wherever there are two or more upper caste people, now we all also have to be careful. So, and then she goes into the different scenes, right? So this idea then leads into her description of not all of them, but several different very high visibility things that happen where usually a white lady, called the police on somebody. And it's, it's that idea that they're doing their job. But the fact that now people have to worry about that it's not the two or more people of color, two or more Black people on the corner, they're assembling, there's going to be trouble, call the cops. It's now everyone else having to say, oh shit, that lady's looking at us. That white lady over there is looking at us and she has her phone out. So now we're in danger. Like there's danger afoot.
Yeah.
So I like the way that she kind of like switched it up a little bit of where the danger is going to come from.
Police are notorious for that. We're really bad for that.
Profiling?
Huh? Well, I wasn't going to call it profiling.
Hey, that's what it is.
I wasn't going to call it that, but I remember in the 80s and 90s hearing the radio call come out that, hey, we got a couple of Charlies at the corner of 6th and Vine. And I'm going, I pulled out my 10 code in my book. Stop it, London. Stop it. I pulled out my 10 code in my book and I'm looking for Charlie stops. Charlie stops. I didn't know what it was. And so I got on the radio and says, I'll be en route to that location. Sergeant gets on the horn and says, negative, you stay in service. Do not come here. So I later find out, tell them, London, what did a Charlie stop mean that they were using? It meant you stop a couple of Black guys.
Yep.
And I did not know that. I had never heard that. So you want to talk about the ultimate caste system in modern day policing, and it lasted into the 90s.
There's code. Is there code now? I'm assuming that there's some other kind of code.
I don't know.
I'm assuming you don't have to
now. No, for the last 20 years in policing, I would say no.
So this leads to just across America, the surveillance of Black citizens. Apparently now that's an acceptable thing. She talked about all the different ways that people have been policed or surveilled in the last few years and what that meant. For some people, the trauma that's associated with that. She talked about her own example of, kind of being trailed or followed, and kind of the encounter that she had with the DEA at the airport. And that, it ended up, it's nothing. Obviously, she was a New York Times reporter at the time, but the idea that doesn't just happen and you go on your way. Like the idea that the other people that were around her were just annoyed that something was happening, but it doesn't impact their psyche. It doesn't impact them emotionally. And then what happens? You can't function. So these disruptions that are happening because, when two or more people are gathered, the attention that's paid to people of color, these disruptions, if they're calling the cops, they're squandering public resources, and it interrupts the economy because sometimes people don't work or they shut people or places down. The impact that it has across communities, it doesn't just impact the one person. Even when there's no physical harm. And then I'm going to leave you with this. The thievery of Caste, stealing the time and psychic resources of the marginalized, draining energy in an already uphill competition. So if we're starting off as scapegoats, we're starting off the lower caste as underdogs, like you're already born into that struggle. And then the idea that as you're moving through your life, you're also going to be, time's going to be stolen from you. Your energy is going to be stolen from you. Your dignity is going to be stolen from you. What do we think about this? I feel like everyone's probably dealt with it and has felt that sort of weight, drain of energy.
It's like that time I called you, Letty, and I was like, I just need to vent.
Yeah. Because people.
Yeah. People put these labels on you. And it's just, you get tired of having to prove your worth. You get tired of having to explain that bad things are happening, and that those that are not affected by it, they dismiss it, and you eventually start to feel like you're going crazy. Am I fighting the right fight? Like, what am I, am I seeing things?
Gaslighting.
Yeah, it's just it, and it's sad because you want to stop because you're tired of the mental gymnastics that you have to continue to do to get people to understand that the truth behind everything that you're saying. But that giving up is exactly what they want you to do. And you can't. So you subject yourself to this mental pain, the social pain, because you want things to be better, and not just better for you at that moment in time, but better for everyone that's going to come after you. You want things to change. You really want things to change. And I think, that's, just speaking of myself, I think that's one of the biggest internal battles that I deal with on the daily. I don't want this thing to drive me crazy, but I'm willing to fight. I'm still willing to fight.
And I can tell you what you just said, I have talked to Letty about, I have talked to Rich about. What you just said is why I did what I did and memorialized everything you just expressed over a lifetime, because I can tell you, London, stay the course. I've been where you're at. I thought it would never change, never get better. One day wake up and I'm a chief. Never in a million years would you have thought a brother from LA would end up being the chief of police. So hang in there, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the points that we make about some of these things is that some people don't have, they don't have not a way out, but a support system that is actually helpful in these times. Like if there's strife or if there's trauma, where are the resources, right? Those things aren't in place. And so that's another part of the caste system that keeps people kind of down, is because there's no real way medically, psychologically to seek help. Sometimes we talked about the medical part of it last week, and how the caste system affects the treatment of people seeking medical help. It's the same thing with mental health. So this, I like that the phrasing of it, the thievery of caste, that the system, all the things that we've been talking about that the system has created in all of these small ways for every single person that's a part of those lower castes, it's having this impact, sometimes daily, but definitely on a consistent basis. And so it just chips away at you as a human being. Are you raising your hand?
No, I'm saying goodbye.
Okay.
I gotta run.
Bye. That was the last point I pulled out of the book, because I liked the way that she addressed that. And then next week, she kind of goes into she sets all this up, right? And then next week we're going to talk about the rivalries that then happen because of the way that it's set up, how there are false rivalries because nobody's winning anything because everyone stays at the bottom. That's chapters 15 and 16, and next week we'll have on the 1st Keith Woolridge and Larissa Mitchell read. And so we could say thank you to Keith. He's coming. He was here last week. He'll be here next week. He's sponsoring the show, and we were able to send books to San Diego for a couple of students. So thank you to that. And I wanted to share, even though I know we were way over, but I wanted, if there are educators who come across what we're talking about here, I know it's at the end of this video and maybe Noel will see it, but this Facebook group that we started through EPIC is for educators who are kind of struggling with a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of Caste, but that are now appropriate to talk about in terms of the mental health of teachers in America. And we're going to be talking about building trainings and doing workshops and things like that. So if anyone's interested, please go look this up and then join the group. And we're going to have some discussions. And there's a training next week that I'll talk about on Monday. So that is that. Thank you so much for joining us or watching the video. Thank you, London, for coming on and sharing your experiences. Thank you, Richard. And thank you to the rain in California. And we'll see you, right? We'll see everybody next week. Have a great week.
Hey, thank you. Bye, everybody.